All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I'm here with Justin Gray. Justin, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show today.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for having me.
You bet. I tell you, I've been looking forward to this, and you and I got connected because you your PR gal or your PR person had reached
Kristen,
out
yeah.
to me on Quoted, and Kristen, and how do you pronounce Kristen's last name?
Peggy.
Heggie. Okay.
Hmm.
And I got to tell you, she is like really awesome at doing what she does. She's really awesome at talking you up, Justin. She sent me
She's
this
had like,
message on.
15 years of experience doing it. So I hope she's
Well,
got it
that
polished at
stands to
this point.
reason.
Yep.
Yeah, she's really brilliant at talking you up. And when I got through reading what she shared, I'm like, heck yeah, I want to talk with Justin to get to know him. And so we already kind of got to have that conversation. And now here we are getting to reconnect to do this podcast interview. And I'll just start off. Just real simple question to get the conversation going. What do you do, Justin, and who do you serve?
Yeah. So there's a simple answer and a bit longer answer. So I'll give the, somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
So I'm a serial entrepreneur and operator. I've built and sold five different companies at this point, ranging from software to payments to services. And after my last go around, which was actually a service consultancy in the go to market and marketing automation space, uh, decided that what I had kind of dipped my toe into from a VC perspective was the direction that we wanted to go, but we ultimately wanted to do that in a very different manner. So fast forwarding today, we are a early stage VC, so we focus on seed and early A organizations that need capital in the B2B venture, or sorry, B2B vertical SaaS space. However, when we invest, we also step in from a go-to-market perspective. So kind of combining what are my two loves, which is early stage organizations, the $1 to $10 million journey with capital, but also really stepping in to provide the how, which I find is the kind of missing ingredient for early stage businesses. Everyone's telling them what they should do, and they've got a pretty good handle on that. But how you actually go about doing that, building great teams, executing, creating what we call go-to-market fit, is an area that most organizations frankly struggle with. So we try to give them both forms of horsepower under what is now in revenue capital.
Very good. So let's back up a little bit. How did you even get into doing? I mean, because I don't imagine as a kid this was your when I was a kid I wanted to be a fireman.
Sure.
So how did this even come to be? How did you become an entrepreneur and get into this kind of work?
Yeah. Well, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. And that's actually what I ended up going to college for. But found out somewhere around my sophomore year that there wasn't a lot of money in it, or at least the money that was there was pretty difficult to find. So I
Okay.
pivoted into business and marketing. And God, how long do we want to make this story? I'll try to keep it high level at the highlights. Graduated well, did not graduate. I'm still 4 credits shy from a college degree, 4 German credits. But left school, got graduated with deficiency, got a internship in marketing, got a string of really crappy marketing jobs that I hated,
Hmm.
but they also kind of gave me the opportunity because most organizations, certainly when I graduated college, was explicitly September 11th. So like I had a summer internship that I was going to kind of graduate into a role with that organization. That was the plan. And then September 11th happened. They were actually in a building that partially collapsed, and they shut down pretty much all of their satellite offices. It was what now is Royal Bank of Canada, but was then Dane Rauscher. And so kind of got thrown into a bit of a tailspin and ended up finally getting a job in marketing. But the reason why that's relevant is, you know, the orgs that were hiring at that point, I did not have my pick of companies or positions, I should say. And so I knew what I wanted to do, which was often not in line with what the organization wanted to do. So I effectively got really, really good at doing things on a zero based or a shoestring budget. And so over, yeah, I think God, I had like three positions as an employee, three different companies I worked for,
Okay.
all 2, 3 years apiece, and basically figured out, taught myself web design, taught myself how to manage a CRM, taught myself how to email market, before marketing automation, how do you segment and make messages intelligent, and it was it turned out to be a great experience, even though at the time it felt like I was doing a lot of jobs that were unpaid, because I would, effectively become this kind of Swiss Army knife of go to market. And the area that really frustrated me was always that like marketing was kind of in this arts and crafts lane, and its job was primarily to drive leads, and then it seemed like there was no real interaction with sales and customer success and kind of that entire buyer journey. Like it was just this very myopic lane. And so through a very strange series of events, which we can get into if you want, I was introduced to a very early organization. In fact, when I ended up coming on, I was employee number 6. This was in 2006. So startups and entrepreneurialism is kind of not what it is today. It was not sexy at that time. Like a 5 employee company sounded like an unsuccessful group of
Sure.
folks that probably were going to be gone the next day. And so ended up making the leap because I really did despise the role that I was in for all those reasons that I mentioned, and took a flying leap and joined what was an early stage a fintech company, a payments company,
Okay.
and took to I think a marketing director role at the time. Worked my way up pretty quickly, and probably more importantly, found out what is the thing that gravitates brings me into startups, is so attractive, is that there were none of those walls. It was, hey, if you want to do it and if you've got the skill set to do it, do it. And that's kind of where everything clicked for me, because I love that environment. I love the hey, you eat what you kill. If you can solve a problem, solve it by all
Yep.
means.
Yep.
And that's what was night and day. That was the unlock for me. That's what I had been waiting for. So ended up taking sweat equity in that company, kind of became their first vice president, built teams under me. We grew that organization from maybe they were doing $1 million annually when I came on,
Okay.
ultimately to 294 million when I kind of took my chips off the table, cashed my equity in, and went out and started a string of companies. And so you asked how I got here. Like ultimately, I got here, running companies, building them from the ground up, all bootstrapped. I never took any capital, and I've seen, number one, how difficult that is. Like being a CEO founder is one of the most difficult jobs in business out there. And then also just kind of seeing like what the ramifications of all that experimentation, failure, success, so on and so forth. Was fortunate to grow those organizations and have successful exits in each of the 5 organizations, but a lot of pain and a lot of iteration and not a lot of places to turn. And so I started dabbling in VC in like 2018, and had become an LP in a number of funds, but I knew I wanted to go out and do something different within that model. It seemed like, frankly, capital was in plentiful supply, but there wasn't that. I mean, there's a ton of value add investors out there, and some of them, make a valiant effort, but we really wanted to do something different in that, like, yes, we can provide capital, but we can really help you fast forward that organization. Like we've worked with so many great, across the board roles in go to market. And one of our big value adds is just bringing those people into an organization that probably they wouldn't look twice at if we weren't helping to broker that intro and break down some of those walls and define the opportunity for both parties. So that's a big element. Also, just playbooks and how do you build these things literally where there is nothing previously. It's just a really exciting thing for myself and my partners, as well as those organizations that we invest in. If we can cut down those iterative cycles and avoid going through that failure, especially when you're in the early stages, right? Like if you make an experiment and that takes 6 or 12 months to figure out it doesn't work, that's a lot of capital. And you see organizations go through those cycles to where they get funding and they make all these big bets, and a lot of those don't pay off. And now suddenly the coffers are in a much different position than they were, 6, 12 months ago, and so on. So it's a painful lesson to learn. And I'd like to think, we had mentioned when you and I connected before, like we're seeing a lot of those proof points here in terms of like the acceleration that we can create, the optionality that we can create, both in terms of profitability as well as potential exits. And then, we've had two organizations that have exited now at this point, and for a VC org that's only been around since 2023 and
That's pretty
only has been
impressive.
investing from that time. That's a pretty counter KPI and counter narrative to what typically is thought of as success.
Yeah, yeah. So you guys are like really not just investing, you guys are really partnering with the companies and like you said, not just providing the what to, but the how to and stuff, and just really getting in there and working with them and just like that's the big value add that you guys are bringing to the table and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly not lip service. Like what
Yeah.
one of our firm partners is literally the CRO right now for one of our companies. We've all worked in these organizations. We spend, anywhere between 10 and 20 hours a week working with founders, their teams, reviewing pipeline, helping them hire, creating messaging, participating in deal cycles, right? Like it's just that very tangible, hands-on uh, you know, value that you can only do from a certain altitude. And that's what I would struggle with, frankly, on the inverse, like just sitting on a board and just, trying to hop in and do advisory on maybe a monthly or quarterly clip I think it's just really difficult to give good advice with that degree of exposure. So for us, it's frankly something that's necessary to give, the right type of guidance that we would want to for these organizations.
Yeah. What inspires you most, Justin, about the work you guys get to do and the impact you're making?
Yeah, so like building different companies, like you're always incredibly dependent on employees, but it wasn't really until I ran a services firm that I think I really grasped how important people are to a business, and probably singularly important to the success of a business. And so what gets me out of bed in the morning, what has motivated me certainly ever since that realization is, what I would call up leveling people, creating, and frankly, when I say that, I really mean upward mobility, like the ability to give people access to equity, to see that equity, benefit they and their families through, a liquidity event or just a degree of participation that they wouldn't be able to have in any other way. My services company, which is called LeadMD, which we exited in 2021 to private equity, literally half of the organization, the enterprise value, went to employees. We created a phantom equity program, change of control bonus is the technical term for it. But that was so important to me. Again, operating in a business where people are your product, they can vote with their feet every single day. When you're a consultant, certainly in the space that we were in, you are in incredibly high demand. If you want to pick the hardest job in the world, be a consultant, because if you're great at your job, you're just going to get more and more work put on your plate. And you can probably go, client side and make 1.5, 2x the amount that you're making in salary that day. So we had to find a way to really incentivize people and also get the right type of people into the business, people that wanted to grow, to embrace an asset, grow an asset, and know that they had something at the end of that rainbow that they were going to personally benefit from. Like seeing that, not only having that experience, but seeing what people do with that. Like I did the count, God, probably a year ago now at this point. I don't know what the count is today. I'm sure it's even increased, but like over a third of the people that were in the business at the time it had exited have gone on to start companies that are
Wow.
employing other people now at this point, and successful businesses, right? And so,
Wow.
the big springboard there is frankly liquidity. It's capital. Can I afford to, start a business and probably not take a salary for a period of time, or make, a much lesser degree salary than I would on the open market, but be building an asset that can change the lives of them and the people around them. Like that's the trigger point, the key that a lot of people need, the freedom to be able to go out and do that. And seeing that experience firsthand and seeing what people have done with it is at 100% what motivates me. And that's the same thing that we get to do through venture now, right? Like we're, again, not only the capital provision side, but really the expertise and the advisory and so on. That I mentioned go to market a lot because that's our core value add. But we're talking to founders about their lives, their families, the
Yeah.
things that they're struggling with. Like it doesn't just end there, is my point. And that type of informed advisory is just really difficult to come by. And I think almost impossible to find a group that is willing to pay for the pleasure of providing that advice. So I think our model is super unique, but it really is meant to create more of what I like to do, which is again, building people to a point where they have the freedom to go out and do whatever they want every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, and so let's dig a little bit deeper into this. And I just, so and you don't have to name names. You can if you want. It's totally your call. But what's the
Sure.
result that you guys have helped? I don't know that we refer to them as a client, maybe a partner. That get that you. What's the result you've helped some of your clients get that you're just like incredibly proud of, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, the baseline there is always going to be revenue, right? But like freedom is the ultimate result, right? Like we just had an exit 2 weeks ago at this point, which is our second. Also, like the order of ops there is interesting. Like our first and second investments have exited now at this point.
Oh,
So there's
wow.
obviously a maturity cycle that is very tangible and real when
Yep.
you can get organizations from. We normally invest right around if someone has $1 million in ARR is kind of our sweet spot. We say anywhere between 500K up to 5 million.
Okay.
But that $1 million range has kind of been a sweet spot. And so to be able to take that degree of performance and increase it rapidly within today's market, which is pretty much what you have to do to attract the attention of partners, buyers, other capital providers, whatever they may be, that acceleration is just incredibly powerful. But the way that you go about doing that, like being a better CEO, being a better founder, being a better manager, a leader for the organization. So it doesn't just have to be the CEO, right? Like the VPs of sales that we put in, or heads of CS, whoever they might be, just like the ability to view human capital as the biggest asset there, like just leads to some pretty phenomenal things to where just people are better at interacting with folks and they're getting more enjoyment out of that and so on. But certainly I'd say like that exit, I mean, you're dealing with a founder who had their first child during our investment, and then the second just came along as well. Like that is life changing in
Yep.
terms of like the outcome for that individual, not only for themselves, but for their family that's
Yep.
involved, right? Like very young family, very young founder. Um, that when you start to think about the real impact of the things that we do every day that don't sound super sexy, like yeah, oh, yeah, you're booking more revenue, you're driving more ARR, your metrics are better, less burn, all that good stuff. Like that tends to be pretty, it gets diminished when you get outside the realm of business because it's like, oh, there's bigger things happening in everyone's world than, to care about some founder's burn rate in B2B SaaS. But when you actually see the people that are involved in that and now what they're able to do as a result and the lives that their families will lead, it actually becomes pretty profound pretty quickly. And so like certainly like those stories and just frankly the story of anyone that walks into an office these days, right? Like virtual or physical, and know that they're more comfortable in their own, in that seat, in their skin. They're able to, pick up the phone, hop on Slack, whatever it happens to be, and get some advice and just know that you've got like, to use the overused word, a partner in that situation. I think is pretty comforting to most CEOs. It certainly would have been comforting for me.
Yeah.
Most CEOs like myself had to go out and like seek out mentors and find people, and that's a difficult thing to do. I mean,
You
a
bet.
lot of people are motivated by things, not just, enabling someone or being their friend. And so with our motivations and our incentives are certainly aligned in the realm of, VC and portfolio company, but even more so, I think, in terms of just like creating more fulfilled humans. I know that's probably sounds a little bit weird to say in the context of a VC, but like that's truly the outcome that matters, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well,
I
okay.
don't
So
mean to get
now,
us so profound here. This
no, you're total. I mean, this is great. This is great because I really try to like just get it for one. I mean, from an outsider's perspective, it's I'm trying to get a clear picture and image of what you guys do, but I'm also trying
Mhm,
to get it for anybody who's listening to this too and stuff,
for
And
sure.
so this has
I mean,
been awesome.
the most important thing is like that is not, like when I describe us to folks with, hey, what do you guys do or what makes you different? Anything that a venture firm is typically known for, like we try to do counter to that thing. So we fund our deals in a very different manner. We operate in a very different manner. Our value prop is completely different. But I think, just the whole notion of like, hey, I'm going to parachute in during your board meeting and try to sound smart, which let's be honest, that's 90% of what happens in board meetings. And then, leave and I'll see you next time in 3 months is just, that the type of relationship that forms between, and everyone will tell you like, oh, your capital partners relationship between, the founder or the team and those individuals should be paramount. Rarely are they so. It is normally a somewhat tense relationship. It's normally somewhat of a when the sun is shining, everything's good. A couple clouds enter, those dynamics can change pretty quickly. And I think that's just super unfortunate in what is a magical time in any business owner's life. And as they're trying to get something off the ground, they're trying to build it and actually, realize that vision that they have in their head. I think they need a different type of partner in that environment. And, this model affords us the ability to be that, but I wish there were more resources structured like that, quite frankly.
Yeah, yeah. So in that environment, where like you said, they parachute in every 3 months and stuff. What does it look like on your guys' end and what you guys do? What does the engagement look like with you guys?
Well, I mean, so we just closed investment last week, and so I'll take it through that lens
Okay.
because it tends to start in a very quote unquote standard or structured manner, and then it goes, anywhere that a startup can take you, which is everywhere. But we will. So like we closed that investment a week and a half ago. We're flying up next week. We'll do kind of our all day and a half workshop type of a deal where at that point, like we've already gone through diligence, we've already, consumed as much as we can about the business from a distance, but we'll sit down with, department heads, the founders, so on and so forth, and we'll really get into areas that we've identified. Like, we've listened to calls, we've tried to understand as much as we can, but like really give us, deep dive insight into that organization. From that exercise, we've actually tried to harness AI as much as we can in our own business. So we've actually got kind of an assessment framework that takes in market data, like general benchmarks from businesses at those stages, takes in our portfolio and those explicit benchmarks because we've got very deep line of sight into how they performed at what stage, what was happening, what was going right, what was going wrong. And we'll take all the information that we bring in from that workshop and the past diligence, and we'll feed it into that model. And it basically spits out what we call three pillars. Now, we might disagree with one of the pillars, right? Like I'm not positioning this like it's the end all be all, but it's a working model, and it gets better every time we feed more information into it. But we will identify, call it 2 to 3 pillars at that point, that we'll kind of treat like a project in terms of structure. We're going to run that just like you would a normal project. That's my old consulting days kind of coming back and informing this in that, like we'll have milestones, we'll have deliverables, we'll have outcomes tied to that project. And so like normally those are like really big, like low hanging fruit items. So like one is normally like a go to market playbook. Our go to market playbooks don't just live in like a PowerPoint or something like that. Like we'll build that playbook into the systems that they're using. If they need systems stood up, we've got another portco right now that we're doing a full CRM, full marketing engagement suite rollout for, because they were, kind of, spreadsheets and cobbling things together. So that could be an item. It could be personas and messaging. It could be pricing. It could be customer success. Whatever that needs to be, those pillars will represent like the most opportunity that we have in kind of this low hanging fruit area. We get done with those, and normally that will be like, okay, now we've got everything up to this foundational standard. Typically, we're hiring, around that same time. So that'll kind of become another initiative. But once we get through like the initial building stuff, we get off into like experimentation and running different plays and seeing what works and so on. Then the sky's the limit, right? Like my founders have us on Slack, they have us on email, they're texting, we're on phone relationships together. We normally meet at least once per week in a more formal manner where we've got an agenda and so on. But at that point, we're working, in the same way that an employee would be communicating, we're communicating. So, I could give a thousand examples of that, but like we just rolled out a new customer success and onboarding process for one of our portcos that we've had in the portfolio for like 2.5, 3 years now at this point. And we're on with their team leads. We're walking them through. Hey, this is, here's how you enable your team. When are you going to have folks trained up? Do we have some data issues we need to work through? So on and so forth. So my point is, it's an always on thing after we're
Yeah.
kind of through that initial structure. And even if it doesn't fall neatly within go to market, they know where the phone is, they know where Slack is, and we're there to help in whatever degree that we can, which frankly is normally relationships, right? Like, hey, you're looking for someone for that role. We probably have a stable of a dozen or two folks that would fit that need. Or you're looking for a new legal representation or an accountant. Like we've got all of those types of service providers, individuals, so on and so forth. Which I actually think, like, if we only did one thing, get rid of all the other stuff that I mentioned. If we only did one thing for our startups, helping them procure talent and trusted partners, vendors, would probably be that one thing. Just because it's so difficult to be batting 1,000 in that regard on your own, and being able to really bring someone in who fits environmentally, is going to be able to operate well within their market, their ASP, the dynamics of their business is just incredible matchmaking. So that I would say beyond all others has the outsized value.
Okay. Okay. Well, so now that we've got some context set here, I want to switch gears just a little bit. I want to start talking about the relationship side of this in a little bit more
Sure.
detail. So, Justin, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And I'm just really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Yeah, really interesting story. So I kind of alluded to it earlier in terms of the weird series of events where I got my kind of first foray into startups. So as I mentioned, like I had a job. I think I was marketing manager or something along those lines. Um, Company was boring. The job was boring. Everything, very siloed. It just wasn't that fulfilling. I wasn't like solving business problems. I was solving a marketing problem within this, contained division. And so the gal I was dating at the time actually ran into a gentleman at a bar here in Phoenix. If anyone's from Phoenix, I'll give a shout out to the Coach House, and people will know what I mean. But they ran into each other at a bar. I guess there was some sort of disagreement or what have you. And then over the course of like apologies and so on, he had offered her a job. And this was like 5 people working at this company. They were all dudes. And she's like, no, I'm not coming to work for your 5-person company. She was an event planner, very successful. But she's like, my boyfriend hates his job. You should talk to him. And so that's how I got introduced to this payments company through this individual who was one of the three founders. Now, the interesting part about the story, so well, I'll finish that thought first. So, if I evaluated taking this role for like 3, 4 months, like they were giving me like P&Ls because I truly did not trust that this was a good decision. It turned out to be the best decision in my life, right? Like opened, gave me the opportunity to operate within a startup, which is like purpose built for who I am and what I like to do. Um, but it led to everything after that, as well. Like had I not had that liquidity event, there's no way I would have been be able to go out and do, what I had done. It also provided just an incredible amount of context. And I regurgitate this all the time in terms of like what's necessary to build a successful business, even what's necessary to build a successful tech ecosystem, which is like a big conversation happening in Arizona and has been for a while. Because if you Google or you ask Claude or ChatGPT or whatever what those ingredients are, it will give you a list of 5 items, and it's all the like, do you have a talent pipeline, i.e., working with universities? Do you have participation from corporate sponsors? Right, like there's 5 keys that everyone agrees builds an ecosystem like that. The sixth, which I think is more important than all of that, is the context to understand what great looks like. Like you have to operate within an environment where you can see how people are dealing with problems, how they're building a business, how they're making decisions, and you have to have exposure to what a awesome fill in the blank VP of sales, AE, CEO, CFO, whoever it is. What does awesome look like there? And also, what does not awesome look like? Like that context has been so informative for everything else in my life because we did a lot of things great. Like we rapidly built and scaled that business. But I also got to see like, what comes about when you hire your buddy rather than maybe the best resource for the organization. What comes about when an organization outgrows talent? What type of talent is flexible enough to grow with an organization? Like, yeah, I could rattle off lists and lists of things there, but like you've seen it, you've done it, you've been around it, you know what that looks like. And for first time founders, I think that's so difficult to try to cobble together that context because what we often see is people are great, especially in sales, right? Salespeople are great at selling themselves. And then before you know it, again, 6, 12, maybe even 18 months have gone by, and you're not where you thought you were going to be. The skills that were advertised are actually not there. And now you've wasted a lot of opportunity cost. You've certainly wasted a lot of capital. So just knowing, having that context off the bat of what do I need in an employee when the company is at 1 million versus 10 versus 50, so on and so forth. That context is just, it's so invaluable. So, that's what that opportunity gave me in addition to, the capital to go out and start businesses. I mean, when I started Lead MD, I didn't take a salary for the first 3 years. Everything went back into the company for the sake of growing because we had a target. We had something that we were aiming at, right?
Yeah.
But that experience just, hands down. Now, the funny thing about that experience is, so that particular founder, myself, everyone was, when you grow a company, 30,000x over the course of like basically 3 years, everyone's really happy at that point, right? And
Yeah.
everyone's like, well, we're going to go out and do this again and so on. So I actually allow that individual to invest in 2 of the businesses that I had started. Frankly, I didn't need the capital. We just all had this camaraderie thing going where we're like, hey, we're going to go out there and do it again together. Proved to be extremely informative in terms of lessons learned because that's not the reason businesses should be, that's not the reason you should take on a partner. You should have a bunch of conversations around what do we both want to do in this? What is our exit plan? So on and so forth. Because of the context of the first organization, for this individual, like these new companies were largely designed to create cash flow and have very quick liquidity paths and so on. For a services business, that is a really difficult recipe to fulfill. So I wanted to put all the money back into the business. I wanted to hire more people. I wanted to grow it. And, frankly, we were misaligned in that regard. It led to a very painful breakup to where, year two, I essentially had to buy his half of the business back out, which by that time was worth multiple seven figures, multiple millions of dollars, that I didn't really have, or didn't certainly was not the use of those funds that I was intending. So
Yeah.
it can be a very expensive lesson, and it's interesting the dichotomy between like both is absolutely, and I would never take this away from that individual. Like that is the opportunity that enabled everything else that I've been able to do. Now, at the same time, incredibly painful in terms of
Yeah.
misalignment
Yeah.
around, and that relationship dissolved. And so it's a really interesting example of both ends of the spectrum.
You bet. You bet. Yeah. I mean, huge opportunity, but yet, like you said, through that whole process, the relationship dissolved in that,
Yep,
and, but that definitely doesn't negate the value of that relationship,
for sure,
I mean,
for sure.
incredible value in that relationship for sure,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, difficult to. I mean, I guess less so maybe these days. Like there are opportunities to, startups are kind of looked at, as I mentioned earlier, in a different lens. But man, back then, I don't know how. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd still be working in a cubicle, quite frankly. And so sometimes those opportunities come along, and certainly the guts, frankly, just to go out there and embrace it requires a special type of individual. And I
Yeah.
think that's what entrepreneurs obviously are, or certainly should be. So yeah, it was the door opener, and a good advertisement for alignment across the board, and not just, hey, we're going to go run that back. I've got two young kids, and I was telling my son the other day, like, because he was talking about this party that they had. I want to do it again. I was like, it's never the same the second time. Like if you're trying to photocopy an experience, it won't have that magic. It won't be the
Yep.
same. That's, frankly, what happened there. Like everyone was so amped up on what we had just done. It was like, oh, let's go out and do it again. When, two
Yeah.
people had drastically different definitions of success.
You bet. You bet. Yeah. Yeah. Well, for anybody that might be listening to this and thinking to themselves, man, Kev, Justin's really got some experience here. And maybe, heck, maybe they're thinking of themselves and thinking like, man, I might really like to have a conversation with Justin and tell him some of the stuff we're up to. Or maybe they're thinking of somebody they know that like, man, from what Justin shared, I know somebody that might be a good fit for those guys.
Sure.
Any websites, any resources we can share with folks?
Oh, sure. Lots of websites, lots of resources. So you can always check out, In Revenue's website, which is super simple, inrevenue.com.
Okay.
I'm super active on LinkedIn, so you can look me up there, Justin Gray, or you can drop me an email. I'm pretty easy to reach, jgray at inrevenue.com, and I will respond. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of folks reaching out. Number one, I don't think I've ever reached out to anyone uh, in a high level position or who I viewed as successful who didn't get back to me. And I think that's a big kind of misnomer there. Like people like, oh, they're not going to take my call or whatever. Like I find that people are generally willing to help. And so, yeah, please reach out. Or if I know someone that you want to get in contact, please reach out. I'd be happy to open those doors, and certainly, can provide any advice that may be helpful in whatever they're working on.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Is there any last thing that you feel led to share, Justin, before we call it a wrap?
Oh God! Well, you can always check out our podcast as well. We also run a podcast. I feel like everyone and their brother does these days. But like the topic is very aligned with essentially what you're doing. We call it the Cheat Code and Friends. All we do is invite interesting relationships of ours on, and we'll
Okay.
discuss topics that can be current events, whatever. They can be something specific to business that we just run into, so on and so forth. Highly conversational. But yeah, Cheat Code and Friends is our podcast. We also, I always forget about this, but we put a book out a year and a couple months ago, February 25, and called The Cheat Code, the Go-to-Market Cheat Code, rather, and all about doing unscalable things that drive success. And frankly, that is relationships. It's creating partner ecosystems and, finding value that you can impart to folks in turn to, ultimately unlock trust, which is, how I built all of my businesses. Like we always had strong strategic partners. Even today, in revenue operates through its strategic partners, which are other venture capital firms. Like we're not saying everyone needs to go out and do what we do. All of our deal flow comes from our venture partners, and they bring us in and provide allocation to us because they know that we're going to step into that business and really help de-risk their investment, help their founders and their teams perform at a higher level. Like it's a exact photocopy of what we preach in that book, which is you've got to provide value to everyone. Everyone thinks like, oh, partner A, partner B come together and they provide value C to the market. First, you have to provide value to partner A,
Partner
right?
A and
And
partner B. Yeah,
yep,
there's got to be a
yep,
synergy and a collaboration there. And
yep. What are you struggling with that I can solve for you? And then
yep,
what can I do for your customer?
yes,
So just I say unscalable things because everyone feels like they need to only do things at scale. And in fact, like if you're creating a culture of that type of hyper value, reward first and then revenue, it's easy to quote unquote scale that without losing the quality that is necessary in relationships because everyone's looking for what can I help you with and knowing that those relationships will open doors in other
that's right.
ways.
Amen. Absolutely. Well, Justin, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you. And I'm excited to get this out there and share it with folks. So thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. So it was a blast.
It was. Thanks again.